Major Kate Storm Weatherford was cleaning her prized crowbar knife when her office's atmosphere crystallized. The air itself seemed to freeze, forming geometric patterns that stretched from floor to ceiling, before coalescing into a being that looked like a walking diamond cathedral. "Jesus Christ," Storm muttered, already reaching for her sidearm before remembering the briefings. First contact had happened 3 months ago, and the Galactic Alliance had specifically mentioned crystalline species. She forced her hand back to the desk. "You could have used the door. Your atmosphere is highly inefficient for matter transmission." The being chimed, its voice creating harmonics that made her coffee cup vibrate. "I am Dean Vauchier of the Galactic Academy. You are Catherine Weatherford, former United States Army Special Forces, current survival instructor." Storm leaned back in her chair, boots still propped on her desk. Her Montana survival school had seen all types, from Silicon Valley billionaires to foreign special forces, but this was a first. "That's me, though most people call me Storm. An appropriate designation given your specialties." The crystalline dean shifted, creating rainbow refractions across her office walls. "We have a problem that only Earth's experts can solve. We are losing students." That got her attention. Losing how? Dying. In what you would consider minor incidents. The dean's crystalline structure dimmed slightly. A student perished last week after being separated from their guide for 6 hours on a class trip. Another died from exposure when their environmental suit malfunctioned for merely 3 hours. We are becoming concerned. Storm stood, walking to her office window. Outside, a group of her current students was practicing fire starting in the rain. "With all due respect, Dean, that sounds like a tech problem, not a survival problem. Don't your people have emergency beacons? Backup systems?" "We have every technological safety measure conceivable." Vauchier's tone created a minor harmonic that somehow conveyed frustration. "That is precisely the problem. Our civilizations have evolved in perfectly controlled environments for so long that we have lost something that humans seem to possess in abundance." "And what's that?" "The ability to survive when technology fails. The capacity to adapt. What do you call it? Grit to keep fighting when systems fail." The dean moved closer, its crystalline form catching the Montana sunlight. "We need instructors who understand true survival. We need Deathworlders." Storm had heard that term in the briefings. It was what the galactic community called species that evolved on high gravity, high predation, or otherwise dangerous worlds. Like Earth. "You want me to teach aliens how to survive. We want you to lead a program that will teach the galaxy's most sheltered species how to stay alive without technology." Vauchier produced a small crystalline cube that projected figures into the air. "The compensation would be substantial. But more importantly, your success or failure could influence Earth's pending application to join the Galactic Alliance." Storm watched her students outside finally get their fire going despite the rain. They were celebrating, not realizing that the real achievement wasn't the fire, it was the fact that they didn't give up. "These students of yours," she said slowly, "they've never dealt with weather, never had to find food or water, never had to make shelter. Many have never experienced unfiltered sunlight or unregulated temperature." The dean's admission carried harmonics of embarrassment. "We have grown, over-specialized." Storm picked up her crowbar, testing its edge with her thumb. "And if I fail? Then we will have to reconsider whether Earth's primitive approach to education has value in modern galactic society." The dean's crystals darkened. It could affect trade agreements, technology sharing, everything. Storm sheathed her knife with a sharp click. "I'll need to assemble a team. And I get to pick the training location." "Agreed. And when I say something is necessary for the course, no matter how dangerous it seems to you, we do it my way." The dean's crystalline surface rippled. "That would be difficult to approve." Storm smiled, the same smile that had unnerved drill surgeons 2 decades ago. "Welcome to Lesson 1, Dean. Survival isn't about being comfortable. It's about doing what's necessary." Vashir's response was lost in the sound of thunder rolling over the Montana mountains. Storm looked out at the gathering storm, already planning. The galaxy wanted to learn survival. She'd show them what Deathworlders could do. Storm's first call went to Marcus Ghost Thompson, and as usual, she found him in the most inhospitable place possible. The video feed showed nothing but white, broken occasionally by bits of ice flying past his face. "Bit busy, Storm," Ghost shouted over the howling wind, teaching an advanced winter survival course in the Arctic Circle. "Perfect timing then." Storm grinned. "How'd you like to teach winter survival to beings that have never experienced temperatures below 70 degrees? The video feed stabilized as Ghost found shelter behind what appeared to be a hastily constructed ice wall. His dark face, weathered by decades of extreme environments, broke into an intrigued smile. "You're talking about the aliens, aren't you? The ones from the news." "Got it in one. Dean from their fancy academy showed up in my office yesterday. Apparently, their students are dying in what we consider basic survival situations." She leaned forward. "I need the best, Ghost. And nobody knows cold weather survival like you." Ghost's laugh carried over the howling wind. "You remember Antarctica 19. You mean when you survived that crevasse fall by building an ice cave and eating your boot leather for 3 days? Yeah, that's exactly why I'm calling." The feed crackled as Ghost adjusted his position. "What's the catch?" "Oh, just Earth's entire relationship with the galactic community riding on whether we can teach some oversheltered aliens not to die when their tech fails." Storm watched his expression carefully. "Plus, some of them are made of gas." There was a long pause, broken only by the sound of Arctic wind. "I'm in. Give me 48 hours to finish this course." Storm's next call was easier to connect but harder to sell. Isabella Wild Rodriguez answered from her fire tower in Montana's Bob Marshall wilderness. "Absolutely not," Wild said immediately. "I've got fire season coming up, and you know how bad it's been getting. Which is exactly why I need you." Storm pressed. "You're the best smoke jumper I've ever met. And more importantly, you know how to teach people to survive when everything's burning down around them." Wild's expression softened slightly. "You trying to butter me up, Storm? Is it working?" "Maybe. Tell me more about these aliens." Storm outlined the situation, watching Wild's expression shift from skepticism to fascination as she described the various species they'd be teaching. "Let me get this straight," Wild said finally. "Some of these aliens are literally made of gas, and you want me to teach them how to survive forest fires. Think of it as a challenge." Wild's laugh echoed through the feed. "You always did know how to push my buttons. Fine, I'm in. But you owe me." The final call was the trickiest. Derek Gator McBride had gone almost completely off-grid after leaving the Louisiana swamps, but Storm had ways of finding people who didn't want to be found. She tracked him to a small island in the Pacific where he was teaching indigenous navigation techniques. "Storm," he drawled when the connection finally went through. "Last time you called with that look on your face, I ended up wrestling an actual alligator." "No alligators this time, Gator. Just aliens." His weathered face cracked into a grin. "Well, hell, why didn't you lead with that?" As Storm explained the mission, Gator's expression grew more serious. "You realize what you're asking. Teaching survival skills to beings that don't even understand the concept of weather. That's why I need you. Nobody's better at teaching people to read natural signs, to understand an environment's rhythm. Plus, some of these aliens are aquatic." "Now that's interesting." Gator stroked his gray-streaked beard. "Reckon they've never had to deal with actual currents or tides. According to the Dean, they live in perfectly regulated tanks. Lord help them." Gator shook his head. "All right, count me in. But we do this right. No shortcuts." Storm smiled as she ended the call. Her team was set. Ghost for Arctic survival and winter skills, Wild for high-risk terrain and fire scenarios, Gator for water survival and natural navigation. plus her own special forces experience. Now came the hard part, designing a course that would challenge their alien students without killing them. Storm pulled up a topographical map of her Montana facility. Time to show the galaxy what Earth's best could do. The arrival of their alien students proved more challenging than expected, starting with the landing pad. Storm and her team watched as what appeared to be a floating crystal chandelier attempted to coordinate with a swirling purple gas cloud to unload equipment from their sleek spacecraft. "Well," Ghost muttered, "this should be interesting." The crystalline being, introducing itself as ZVAC from Rigel 7, created harmonic tones that their translator rendered into perfect English. "This atmospheric precipitation is highly concerning. Should we not wait for more optimal conditions?" Storm glanced at the light drizzle. "This is optimal conditions." A horrified chiming sound emanated from ZVAC's structure. The gas cloud, named Zephyr, condensed slightly in what Storm was learning to recognize as anxiety. But our environmental briefing indicated that dihydrogen monoxide in its liquid form can be lethal. ZVAC's crystals flickered in distress. "Only if you breathe it," Wild responded dryly. "Welcome to Earth, where water falls from the sky, and we deal with it." The next arrival nearly caused an incident. A shimmer in the air coalesced into what appeared to be thousands of tiny metallic insects, moving in perfect synchronization to form a roughly humanoid shape. "We are the collective," they spoke in unison, their voice a strange chorus. "Our previous form was deemed potentially disturbing to biological entities." "Hell," Gator breathed, "that's disturbing enough." The final group emerged from the ship's aquatic chamber, 3 floating spheres of water, each containing what looked like bioluminescent jellyfish. The Mer Collective, as they called themselves, immediately began analyzing the rain's pH levels and declaring them barbarically unstable. Storm cleared her throat. "All right, welcome to Earth Survival Training Facility, Montana. I'm Major Weatherford, but you can call me Storm. You've all been selected because your species have the highest mortality rates during technological failures. We're going to fix that." Question. The collective's 1,000 voices spoke. "Our research indicates that humans utilize firearms in survival scenarios. Will we be expected to handle primitive projectile weapons?" "We'll get to tool use eventually," Storm answered. But first, she was interrupted by a piercing crystalline shriek. ZVAC had just discovered mud. "My load-bearing surfaces are being contaminated by particulate matter." The crystal being was trying to hover above the ground, its lower facets already streaked with brown. "This is highly irregular." Ghost stepped forward, his patient Arctic instructor voice in full effect. "That's dirt mixed with water. It's everywhere on Earth. You'll need to learn to deal with it." The gas cloud Zephyr suddenly condensed partially into liquid form. "Apologies," it burbled through the translator. "Atmospheric stress response. Please continue." Storm shared a look with her team. They'd known this would be challenging, but the reality was even more complex than expected. These beings weren't just unfamiliar with survival. They were completely disconnected from natural environments. "All right," Storm projected her voice over the various distressed sounds. "First lesson starts now. Everyone follow me to the main facility. Yes, through the rain. Yes, over the mud. Welcome to nature, ladies and gentlemen. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and it's exactly what you need to learn about." The procession that followed was almost comical. ZVAC tried to create crystalline platforms to walk on, shattering them with each step. Zephyr kept partially condensing and having to reform. The collective's tiny robots struggled to maintain formation in the rain, and the Mer Collective's spheres left perfect circles in the mud as they floated along. "Storm," Wild whispered as they walked, "how exactly are we supposed to teach survival skills to beings that can barely handle a light rain?" Storm watched as ZVAC attempted to refract the raindrops away, accidentally creating a small rainbow. "We start with the basics. Very, very basic basics. Then we build up. They've got to learn sometime. Might as well be from the best." Behind them, Zephyr accidentally condensed again, this time forming a small puddle that the collective nearly fell into, causing a chain reaction of panic among the other students. Besides, Storm added with a grin, "Think of the stories we'll have after this." The first rule of survival, Storm announced to her alien students assembled in the training room, is that everything can kill you. The second rule is that nothing has to kill you if you understand it. Zivak's crystalline structure vibrated in distress. These rules appear contradictory. "Welcome to Earth." Ghost stepped forward, carrying what looked like standard camping gear. "Today we're going to learn about fire." The reaction was immediate. Zephyr condensed partly into liquid again. The Mer Collective's spheres rippled in alarm, and the Collective's 1,000 tiny robots formed a defensive pattern. Oxidation reactions without containment. The Collective's chorus of voices rose in pitch. "Our research indicates this is how humans accidentally self-terminate." Actually, Wild cut in. "Fire is one of humanity's oldest tools. Zivak, you're up first." The crystalline being approached the small fire pit Wild had prepared, its facets reflecting the afternoon sun. "I do not understand. My species regulates temperature through crystalline reformation. And what happens when your regulatory systems fail?" Wild picked up a ferro rod and striker. "Watch carefully." The demonstration that followed was unlike any survival class Storm had ever witnessed. Zivak, attempting to strike the ferro rod, instead channeled the friction through its crystalline structure and created a dazzling light show that temporarily blinded everyone in the room. "Sorry," the alien chimed in distress. "Internal refraction error." "No, wait," Ghost said suddenly, studying the crystalline being. "You just discovered something. Try focusing that refracted light into a single point." What followed was a revelation. Zivak learned it could focus sunlight through its body like a massive magnifying glass, creating instant fire-starting capabilities. More importantly, it learned it could control the intensity. Generating primitive thermal energy without technology. Zivak sounded amazed. "This is unprecedented." The breakthroughs continued. Zephyr, after several accidental condensations, discovered it could detect minute atmospheric changes that preceded weather shifts. A critical survival skill. The gas-based being actually became excited about rain, learning it could ride the pressure fronts to predict storms hours in advance. The Mer Collective, initially disgusted by unfiltered water sources, made perhaps the most startling discovery. During a water purification lesson, they found they could naturally filter toxins through their cellular structure, an ability their species had evolved millennia ago, but forgotten in their perfectly regulated tanks. "This is extraordinary," their synchronized voices bubble through the translator. "We are discovering capabilities dormant since our pre-technological age." The Collective proved to be natural problem solvers, their 1,000 robot form able to reconfigure for various survival tasks. They could form bridges, tools, even temporary shelters by working in unison. Storm watched as her team guided each species through their discoveries. This wasn't just survival training anymore. It was evolutionary archaeology, helping these beings rediscover abilities buried under millennia of technological dependence. "Ready to try something more challenging?" she asked as the basic lessons concluded. Query. The Collective spoke. "Will it be dangerous?" "Everything's dangerous if you don't respect it," Gator drawled. "But you're starting to learn the right respect." Storm laid out their next exercise, an overnight camping experience. Basic for humans, but revolutionary for beings who had never slept without environmental controls. Zivak raised a crystalline appendage. "What if we encounter uncontrolled organic life forms?" "You mean animals?" Wild smiled. "That's part of the experience. But we'll be there to guide you." As they prepared for the overnight exercise, Storm pulled her team aside. "They're progressing faster than expected." Ghost nodded. "They're not just learning our techniques, they're adapting them to their own biological capabilities. That crystalline fire-starting trick. Never seen anything like it." The Mer Collective's filtration abilities could revolutionize water treatment, Gator added. And Zephyr's weather prediction is better than our best meteorological equipment. Almost makes you wonder, Wild mused, watching Zephyr practice riding air currents, if their species evolved these survival traits for a reason, before they got so dependent on technology. Storm watched as ZVAC proudly demonstrated its new fire-starting ability to the others, creating a perfectly controlled flame. Well, they're about to get a crash course in why those traits mattered. Night's coming, and the forecast calls for rain. The aliens, surprisingly, didn't seem as terrified by this news as they would have been days ago. They were too busy discovering what they could really do. The overnight camping exercise started smoothly enough. ZVAC had mastered creating crystalline shelter structures. Zephyr was confidently predicting weather patterns, and the Mer Collective had actually started enjoying the challenge of filtering different water sources. Even the collective seemed comfortable, their 1,000-robot form adapting to the terrain with increasing confidence. Then everything went sideways. Storm. Ghost's voice crackled over the radio. We've got a situation at the East Ridge. The ground's shifting. Storm was already moving, Wild and Gator close behind. They found Ghost standing at the edge of what should have been a gentle slope. Instead, the landscape was literally bending, reality warping like a funhouse mirror. Oh no, the collective's chorus of voices came from behind them. It's the quantum. The what? Storm demanded. As if in answer, the air split open. A being Storm had only read about in the briefing materials emerged. A fourth-dimensional species that existed partially out of normal space-time. The quantum had been so quiet during training that Storm had almost forgotten about them. Apologies, the being's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Sleep cycle-induced dimensional instability, attempting to stabilize. The ground lurched. Trees bent at impossible angles. A crack appeared in the earth, widening rapidly into a canyon that shouldn't exist. Everybody move. Storm shouted. Get to high ground. ZVAC crystallized a bridge across the growing chasm, but it shattered as reality continued to warp. The collective's robot forms scattered, barely regrouping on the other side. Zephyr partially condensed in panic before riding an air current to safety. The quantum is phase-shifting in their sleep. The collective explained as they were formed. Their species exists in multiple dimensions. Dreams can affect local space-time. Storm grabbed her radio. This is not a drill. All students implement emergency protocols now. What happened next amazed even her. ZVAC, instead of panicking about the mud and chaos, began growing crystalline support structures to stabilize the shifting ground. The formations caught the moonlight, creating emergency beacons visible for miles. Zephyr, fully in their element, used their newfound weather-reading abilities to map safe air currents above the warping terrain. They became a living map of stable zones, guiding others to safety. The Mer Collective, proving their species' adaptability, formed a water bridge across a section of the chasm, their natural filtering abilities preventing the bridge from being contaminated by the dimensional disruptions. Most impressively, the collective split their robot form into organized teams, some forming emergency shelters, others creating communication relays, and a brave few venturing into the warped zones to map safe passages. Storm. Wild called out. We need to wake the quantum. No. The collective's voices rang out. Forced awakening could cause catastrophic dimensional collapse. Ghost, ever practical, was already setting up emergency shelter poles. Then we ride it out. Everyone remember your training. Storm watched in amazement as her alien students, beings who days ago couldn't handle rain or mud, implemented survival tactics with increasing confidence. They weren't just surviving. They were innovating. ZVAC discovered their crystalline structures could redirect dimensional energy. Zephyr learned to detect safe zones by reading dimensional currents like weather patterns. The Mer Collective found they could purify dimensionally tainted water, creating safe zones around them. Hours passed in controlled chaos. Storm and her team guided their students through the crisis, but increasingly found themselves stepping back, watching with pride as the aliens applied their training in ways no human could have imagined. Finally, the quantum shifted fully back into normal spacetime, awakening naturally. The dimensional disruption stabilized, leaving behind a transformed landscape and transformed students. "I believe," Zivak chimed thoughtfully, covered in mud but no longer caring, "we have just experienced what humans call the teachable moment." Storm surveyed the scene. The crystalline bridges, the robot rescue teams, the gas-being weather stations, the water-filtered safe zones. Her students had faced chaos itself and adapted. "No," she replied with pride. "You just experienced real survival training. Sometimes the galaxy throws impossible problems at you. The trick isn't avoiding them. It's learning to handle them." The quantum shifted apologetically. "We never knew we could affect reality this way." "Welcome to Lesson 1 of Advanced Survival." Storm grinned. "Knowing what you can do is just as important as knowing what can kill you." In the aftermath of the quantum incident, something fundamental changed in the training dynamic. Storm noticed it first during the morning briefing, as her students gathered without their usual trepidation about Earth's harsh conditions. Zivak was actually sitting directly on the ground, crystalline structure interfacing with the soil. "We have been analyzing the mineral composition of this terrain," they chimed. "Our species once used geological readings to predict seismic events. The knowledge was archived as primitive data centuries ago." "That's not primitive." Gator leaned in, interested. "That's survival intelligence. Your ancestors developed that for a reason." The collective, whose robot form now moved with fluid grace over the rough terrain, joined the discussion. Query: could this be why our original design included ground-penetrating sensors? We dismissed them as redundant given our technological capabilities. "Nothing in evolution is redundant," Wild said, setting up the day's training equipment. "Everything serves a purpose, even if you've forgotten what it is." The quantum, now fully stabilized, shifted through multiple dimensional planes before speaking. "We have accessed ancestral memory records. Our species once used dimensional shifting deliberately to escape predators and find safe spaces. Like a natural emergency system," Ghost nodded. "Your bodies remember what your technology made you forget." Storm watched as understanding dawned across her diverse group of students. The Mer Collective's spheres pulsed with renewed interest as they tested their water filtration abilities on increasingly complex compounds. Zephyr, once terrified of atmospheric variations, now rode air currents with obvious joy, mapping wind patterns that even Earth's best meteorologists might miss. "Today's lesson," Storm announced, "is going to be different. Instead of us teaching you survival skills, you're going to show us what your species can really do." What followed was extraordinary. The collective demonstrated how their robot form could create living machines, adapting to problems in real time. They built bridges across chasms, formed complex tools, and even created a basic shelter that could respond to environmental changes. Zivak, working with their newfound geological sensitivity, showed how their crystalline structure could not only read terrain but strengthen it. They created support structures that grew stronger under pressure, a skill their species had evolved for surviving on their high-gravity homeworld. The quantum, now embracing their dimensional abilities, demonstrated controlled shifts that could create safe pockets of space-time, natural bunkers against environmental threats. "Our ancestors," they explained, existing briefly in 3 different dimensions, used this to protect entire communities. But it was Zephyr who made perhaps the most stunning breakthrough. The gas being had been quietly experimenting with atmospheric manipulation when they suddenly called everyone's attention. "Observe," Zephyr's translated voice carried excitement as they condensed and expanded rapidly. "By altering my molecular structure, I can create localized pressure systems." The air around them shifted, forming a controlled microclimate. "On my homeworld, before environmental regulation, my species used this to protect others from toxic atmospheric events." That's not just survival, Wild breathed. That's environmental engineering without technology. Storm gathered her team as the aliens continued exploring their rediscovered abilities. We're not just teaching them to survive, she said quietly. We're helping them remember who they were before technology did everything for them. Ghost nodded. Makes you wonder how many other species out there have forgotten their own capabilities. More importantly, Gator added, makes you wonder what humanity might forget if we ever get too comfortable with our own technology. The day continued with each species pushing the boundaries of their natural abilities. The Mer Collective discovered they could communicate through water vibrations across remarkable distances. The collective found they could form specialized subunits for different survival tasks, operating independently yet in perfect coordination. As sunset approached, Storm watched ZVAC create a crystalline shelter that captured and redistributed heat with perfect efficiency. No technology required. Inside, Zephyr maintained optimal atmospheric conditions, while the Quantum kept watch across multiple dimensions. You know what this means, Wild said, joining Storm's observation. They're not just surviving anymore. They're thriving. Storm smiled. That's the real lesson of survival training. It's not about just staying alive. It's about remembering how to truly live. Around them, their alien students continued to evolve, rediscovering abilities buried under millennia of technological dependence. They weren't just learning Earth survival skills. They were relearning their own natural strength. The Galactic Academy's testing committee arrived in a ship that screamed luxury and environmental control. Their horror at Montana's primitive conditions was evident even before they stepped out of their climate-controlled vessel. This evaluation, the lead examiner announced, will take place on Testing World K789, a controlled environment we use for survival certification. No, Storm said firmly, causing the committee members to blink their various sensory organs in surprise. We test in the real world, or not at all. Major Weatherford, the examiner's translator, conveyed barely concealed condescension. K789 has been carefully designed to be predictable, Ghost cut in, which misses the entire point of what we've been teaching. After hours of debate, a compromise was reached. The test would take place on Epsilon Drill, an untamed world recently discovered by the Alliance. 3 weeks, minimal equipment, and a simple goal: survive. Storm insisted on accompanying her students, despite the committee's protests. You want to evaluate them? Fine. But I trust my team's judgment more than your sensors. The moment they landed on Epsilon Drill, Storm knew this would be different. The air shimmered with strange energies, the plant life pulsed with bioluminescence, and the ground itself seemed to shift with tectonic restlessness. Well, ZVAC chimed, already extending crystalline sensors into the soil, this is certainly not Montana. Good. Storm smiled. Show me what you've learned. The aliens moved with purpose. The collective immediately split into reconnaissance teams, their robot form adapting to the alien terrain. Zephyr rose high into the atmosphere, reading wind patterns and atmospheric composition. The Mer Collective began sampling and filtering the strange oily liquid that passed for water on this world. The Quantum, existing partially in multiple dimensions, provided early warning of environmental threats. Temporal storm approaching from the northwest. Suggestion: we should establish base camp in a dimensionally stable location. ZVAC grew a crystalline shelter that adapted to the planet's strange energies, redirecting them to power natural defense systems. Inside, Zephyr maintained a breathable atmosphere while the Mer Collective established a clean water supply. The first challenge came when local predators, floating crystalline entities that fed on energy, discovered their camp. Instead of panicking, the group worked together. ZVAC created energy-dispersing structures, the Quantum shifted the most attractive energy signatures out of phase, and the collective formed a living early warning system. They're not just surviving, Wild observed proudly. They're dominating. The real test came halfway through week 2. a galactic survey ship, caught in one of Epsilon Drill's notorious gravity storms, crashed 30 kilometers from their position. The committee, monitoring from orbit, prepared to suspend the test for an emergency rescue operation. Before they could act, Storm's students were already moving. The Quantum shifted through dimensions to scout the safest route. Zephyr mapped atmospheric hazards while the collective split into relay teams to maintain communication. ZVAC and the MER collective worked together, creating crystal-water hybrid structures to bridge dangerous terrain. They reached the crash site to find the survey team trapped in their damaged environmental suits, surrounded by local predators. What followed was a masterclass in xenobiological survival tactics. The MER collective purified local water sources to cool overheating suit systems. ZVAC grew crystal structures that redirected the predators' feeding attempts. The Quantum created stable space-time pockets for emergency shelter, while the collective's robot form repaired critical suit breaches. Remarkable, one of the survey team members said later, after they'd all returned safely to the base camp. We expected to die out here. Instead, we were rescued by students. Storm watched as her aliens, she couldn't think of them as just students anymore, worked seamlessly to incorporate the survivors into their camp routine. Each species contributed their unique abilities, natural skills working in harmony with their newfound survival knowledge. This is what we were teaching them, she told the wide-eyed survey team. Not just how to handle one crisis, but how to adapt to any crisis. Not just how to survive, but how to help others survive. The Galactic Academy's monitoring committee, watching from orbit, had fallen into stunned silence. They'd expected a simple survival test. Instead, they were witnessing the rebirth of abilities their civilizations had forgotten they possessed. Major Weatherford, the lead examiner's voice crackled over the comm. I believe we may need to reevaluate our entire approach to emergency response training. Storm smiled as she watched ZVAC teach the survey team how to read crystal formations for seismic warnings. That's the thing about survival, she said. Sometimes the oldest ways are the best ways. The graduation ceremony was unlike anything the Galactic Academy had ever seen. Instead of the traditional holographic presentations in climate-controlled amphitheaters, it was held outdoors at Storm's Montana facility, under an open sky threatening rain. Is this weather intentional? A Crystalline Academy board member asked nervously. No, Storm replied with a smile. That's rather the point. The graduates assembled with a confidence that made their former selves seem like different beings entirely. ZVAC stood proudly, their crystalline structure now deliberately incorporating traces of Montana minerals. Zephyr floated easily through the varying air currents, maintaining perfect cohesion. The MER collective spheres contained traces of purified mountain stream water, while the collective's robot form moved across the rough terrain like a living river of metal. The Quantum, now fully in control of their dimensional shifting, existed simultaneously in the ceremony and slightly adjacent to it, keeping watch across multiple planes of reality. Dean Vashir addressed the assembly, their crystalline form somehow conveying both dignity and amazement. When we first proposed this program, many called it regression. They said we were abandoning millions of years of technological progress to embrace primitive survival methods. Storm shared a knowing look with her team as the dean continued. The events on Epsilon Drill proved how wrong we were. Not just about survival skills, but about our own species' capabilities. These graduates didn't just learn to survive without technology. They rediscovered abilities our species evolved over millions of years and then forgot in our rush for technological comfort. The dean's next words were interrupted by a sudden downpour. 6 months ago, this would have caused panic among the assembled aliens. Now, ZVAC simply adjusted their crystalline structure to channel the water, creating a natural umbrella effect that the other graduates quickly gathered under. Case in point, Ghost muttered, grinning. The revolution sparked by the program spread faster than anyone expected. Within months, wealthy young aliens from across the galaxy were signing up for what they called authentic Deathworld experiences. the Galactic Academy's new survival sciences division, with Storm's team as chief consultants, couldn't expand fast enough to meet demand. But the real validation came 6 months after graduation, when an ionic storm hit the Rigel 7 colony. The environmental systems failed completely, leaving thousands of crystalline beings facing what would once have been certain death. ZVAC, who happened to be visiting their homeworld, led the response. Using their rediscovered geological sensing abilities, they taught others to grow emergency shelters. The collective, who had been studying local infrastructure, split into thousands of repair units. Zephyr created protective atmospheric bubbles, while the Mer collective purified emergency water supplies. The quantum shifted vulnerable populations into safe dimensional pockets until the crisis passed. Not a single life was lost. "You've started something remarkable," Wild told Storm as they watched a new class of students arrive at the Montana facility. Among them were members of species they'd never trained before, plasma beings, silicon-based life forms, even a collective consciousness that existed as pure energy. "We didn't start anything," Storm replied. "We just reminded them of what they already knew." She watched as her original graduates, now serving as assistant instructors, greeted the new arrivals. ZVAC was already demonstrating crystal growing techniques to a silicon-based student. The collective was teaching a swarm consciousness how to maintain cohesion in varying gravities. Zephyr floated nearby, explaining atmospheric reading to a plasma being. "You know what the best part is," Gator said, joining them. "Every species that remembers these skills teaches us something new about survival, things humans never even imagined." Ghost nodded toward where the quantum was teaching other dimensionally sensitive species about safe shifting techniques. "Makes you wonder what humans might remember if we needed to." Storm watched as the new students began their first tentative steps into what they still called extreme conditions, conditions their ancestors had once considered normal. Above them, storm clouds gathered again, but nobody ran for shelter. Instead, they turned their faces up to feel the rain, each in their own way, remembering what their species had once known. "That's the real lesson," Storm said softly. "Sometimes the best way to move forward is to remember where you came from." Around them, the next generation of galactic survivors began their journey, guided by those who had already remembered their own strength. The rain fell, the wind blew, and life adapted, just as it always had.